In this video, I'll take you through the full edit of this wildlife photograph and reveal an essential editing skill that most photographers never learn, one that completely changes how you approach editing. Let's get started. To start on this image, I'm going to run this image through DxO Pure Raw 5. The image is pretty clean. I just want to get rid of the slight little amount of noise there is in this image. It was shot with an old camera, and I just want to sharpen up some of the detail in this image here. I'm going to zoom into 100% so I can see the detail up close. And I'm going to use a small luminance value here, probably about 30 or so. Let's increase this to 200% just so we can see it a bit closer. Force details, I'll leave it 0. Lens sharpness optimization, I'll put that on 100. And chromatic aberration I will remove. So I'll simply just click process now, and that will create a DNG file for me to use in Lightroom. I'm going to set the profile to Adobe Standard. Going to just make sure my detail is all at 0 for now. I will do sharpening a little bit later. So I think to start on this image, I'm happy with the white balance. I might just warm it up very slightly. Now the image is more biased towards the shadows side. When I look at the mid-tone peak here on the histogram, it's a little bit biased towards that right-hand side. So I might just increase my exposure very slightly. I might just increase some of the blacks and then bring in some more whites just to bring in a little bit more contrast to the image. Now looking at the image, I think the whites have maybe made this image a bit too bright. So I might just back off the exposure very slightly. And instead of raising those midtones using the exposure slider, perhaps use the whites slider just to drag more of that detail towards the highlights there. This image was shot just before the sun was rising, so I don't want there to be too much contrast in this image. And that white slider will definitely bring in a lot of contrast. So I think I'm just going to keep darkening this image slightly and maybe just raising the blacks up just to eliminate too much of that contrast, especially in the shadow area of this image. Now, when I look at this lion, what is the main story in this image? What is the main parts of the image I want the viewer to connect with? And that is definitely the eye contact. Now, when you zoom out and look at the image from a broader perspective, the face of the lion stands out a lot there, and I don't want that to compete with the eyes of the lion here. So the first thing I'm going to do is just locally just darken that area using a radial gradient. Might just drop the highlights and see what that does. I think that's working pretty well. Maybe a little bit on the exposure, like that. And then I might just add another radial gradient here. It's a little bit bright for my liking, like that. And you can see as I turn the masks off and on, you can see that very small adjustment there has definitely helped bring more attention to the face or to the eyes of the subject. What I'm showing here just scratches the surface. If you want to really understand how to edit wildlife photos with confidence and intent, my Lightroom course, The Wildlife Edit, walks you through my complete workflow. I share every technique and principle I've refined over 18 years in the field to help you create stronger, more impactful images. You can find the link in the description if you'd like to check it out. Now the line is very centered in this frame. I do want to think about working on a crop here. Now there are various ways you could actually crop this image. I think for me, I might go with the line on the right-hand side. I feel like because this paw is more leaning towards the right-hand side, I do feel like placing him on the right perhaps works a little bit better. You could place the line on the left-hand side. It's just really about what kind of movement you want to portray in this image. Obviously, the line is walking towards us, so we could actually go for a vertical crop here as well. I guess for something like Instagram, I could crop it like this. But I think for me, in this image now, I'm going to use a 2:3 aspect ratio, and I'm going to place the lion, I think, on the right-hand side here. I think for me, that works best. Now, like I said earlier, this was just before the sun was rising, and the light was also coming from the right-hand side. So I think because we've cropped away quite a lot of this image, this right-hand side here has been darkened because of the vignette of the lens. This was shot at f4, I believe. So that vignette has been created because of that very wide aperture. So if I look at the right-hand side here, it's quite dark. And on the left-hand side here, it's a little bit brighter just because of that vignette. So I do need to adjust for that. Perhaps using a radial gradient. Let's just zoom out as well. Radial gradient on the right-hand side here. I might just brighten up the top left of the frame. Not very much, and I might just roll away some of the blacks just to create a little bit more of an effect of light coming in from that right-hand side. I might just increase the warmth very, very slightly like that. That is the before, and that is the after. Maybe that's a little bit strong, so I'll just back that off very slightly there. Okay, so in terms of isolating the subject, I do feel like there's a lot of distraction in the background here. So what I want to try and do is select my subject. Now there's two ways to do this. Obviously you can select subject, but if you look at the fur on the top of the line here, let's zoom into 200% here. You can see some of the background has been selected. It's not done a perfect job at selecting the lion. I think on the bottom here, it's not done too bad of a job. It's missed a little bit of fur there, but I think we can improve on that. So I'm going to delete that mask. I'm going to create an object mask, and I find often an object mask will select an animal with fur a lot better. So let's see what Lightroom does. If we zoom in now, you can see there's a lot of that background that hasn't now been selected. Okay, it's missed that small amount of fur there, which is not a big problem. So it's actually done a much better job in this example. Now, I would suggest when you are creating selections in Lightroom, especially for a subject like this, especially one with fur, try the subject selection and an object selection. Just compare the two and see which selection gives you the better results and go with that one. Now, like I said earlier, I want to create a little bit more separation with this lion in terms of the relationship with the background. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate and invert this because I want to select the background. I'm going to subtract a linear gradient because I don't want to work on the immediate foreground. It's mainly only that very distant background there. What I'm then going to do is add some negative clarity. I just want to take away a little bit of that detail, perhaps a little bit of that contrast, and maybe just darken it down slightly with some negative highlights. So it's a very subtle edit there, but I feel like it does help the subject stand out very, very slightly. Now, I'm going to add a linear gradient to the bottom, and the reason for that is just to help the viewer's eye move over the bottom of the frame towards the subject. Very subtle there. So it's kind of like adding a very selective vignette to the bottom. Now, there are a couple of issues I want to address, and it's mainly to do with color. I like the overall exposure we have here, so I think working on color next will definitely help. There's two issues here. I don't like the green in the background. And the color on the lion's fur, I feel like is too yellow. I want to almost warm that up a little bit. And I want to bring in a little bit more mood and color contrast to this image. So let's work on the greens. I'm going to go to point color. I'm going to select the green in the image. If you're on point color and you click visualize range, it will desaturate everything and show you what you have selected. I'm going to increase that range because I want to select all of the greens in the image. And I think I'm just going to simply just desaturate them. Let's click this off here to see what it's doing on the image. I like what that's doing. It's definitely taking a little bit of emphasis away from those colors. I might just change some of the hue here just to see what it looks like, and perhaps just adjust this variance here. I've been experimenting with this variance slider quite a bit, and often when you desaturate a color and you add a lot of variance, it just helps draw away a little bit more color and separate that green from surrounding colors in the image. So I really actually quite like that effect there. That's desaturated those greens quite nicely. Let's work on the colors of the lion here. I'm going to sample one of these colors on the face. I'm going to increase the saturation slightly and then just change the hue. But I'm running into a problem here. It's changing the hue in the background as well. I only want it to affect the lion here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to delete that swatch. Going to go back to my masks, going back to my lion here. And I'm going to use the point color on a mask. That simply allows me to target the color only on that mask we created. So sample that color there. Let's just add a little bit more saturation. Adjust the hue slightly. And that's looking a lot better there. Let's just turn that off and then back on just to see that subtle difference to the image. The next thing I want to do is I want to add some color grading to bring in a little bit more mood to this image. Going to add blues to the shadows, like so. Maybe not so much. Use the balance slider to only place that color grading in the darkest parts of the image. Like that. Might just darken some of that with the luminance slider there. Perhaps that's adding a little bit too much blue. I just want it to be very subtle. Perhaps around about there. Let's just go back to my white balance. I want to warm this up slightly. And then maybe just increase the blue in the shadows to create more color contrast. Playing around with this blending just to make it look a little bit better. Next thing I'm going to do is add a black fade effect. I've got a free Lightroom Tools preset pack here that has the effect built in. If you want to download that for free, you can use the link in the description. And one effect I like to use on a lot of my images is this black fade effect. It just softens the blacks in the image, really gives a nice aesthetic quality. Now I'm really liking this. I think I might try and add a vignette. Let's just add a radial gradient. I'm going to invert that. Just going to add a subtle vignette around the image, not very noticeable. Let's just make this a little bit bigger. Just going to help put a little bit of emphasis back onto that lion. And then I might just increase the amount of this mask we added to the top right-hand corner to bring in a little bit more brightening over there. Now, one of the skills I see a lot of photographers missing out on when they approach editing is they don't really know exactly what they're actually trying to achieve with an image. Now, if you answer a question, you ask yourself, what is the point of this photograph? What is the main part of this image I want the viewer to connect with? Answering that question will help you deal with more of an intentional workflow and help guide you towards the result that you're actually looking for. So in this image here, that eye contact with the viewer is the main thing that I'm trying to go for. So every editing decision needs to try and focus on that goal. The vignette around the lion, the eye contact, emphasizing that eye contact, also creating the color contrast to try to draw a different mood in terms of how the image is perceived by the viewer. All those types of things go into every editing decision. So the skill you should try and develop for yourself is a very simple question. And what is the point of the photograph? What are you trying to achieve? And I think if you can answer that, that helps guide a lot of editing decisions when you sit down to edit a photograph. The next thing I want to look at is the detail in this image. The image is quite sharp. It was shot with a 600mm prime, but I can increase the sharpness here on this lion's face. The radius I'm going to use is 0.5. Detail, I'll probably put to around 10 or 15. Now masking, I'm going to use at probably around about 40 or so. I only want to sharpen the areas that are in focus, so everything in white will be sharpened, and those are the most important areas to be sharpened. There's no point in sharpening an area that is out of focus. I think then the next thing I want to look at is perhaps changing the white balance tint. I think adding that bit of color grading just change the balance of the color a little bit. Just going to add a small amount of magenta tint there. Play around with a bit more warming or cooling on that white balance slider there. This edit didn't focus much on dealing with noise, but editing high ISO images can be one of the biggest challenges in wildlife photography. In this next video, I'll show you exactly how I process an ISO 25600 image to produce clean, sharp results.